Right. Okay. This meeting is being conducted utilizing teleconferencing and electronic means consistent with the State of California Executive Order N-29-20 dated March 17th, 2020 regarding the COVID-19 pandemic. The live stream of the meeting may be viewed on Comcast Channel 15 and or online as noted in the agenda. In accordance with the executive order, the public may only view the meeting on television and or online and not in the council chambers. The Town of Los Gatos Planning Commission meeting of Wednesday, July 22nd, 2020 is now called to order. We are conducting tonight's meeting in a virtual setting using Zoom. All planning commissioners and staff are participating from remote locations, and all voting will be conducted by roll call vote. Mr. Paulson, would you please call the roll?
Yes, let the record reflect that all planning commissioners are in attendance on the teleconference.
Thank you, Mr. Paulson. And then the next item on the agenda would normally be the Pledge of Allegiance. And although it's not listed on the agenda, I just wanted to note for anyone that was observing that although we normally say the Pledge of Allegiance at this point during the meeting, the town has temporarily suspended this due to the Zoom format of the meetings because there's a lot of delay in the sound. So then we will move on to public participation. As the Planning Commission conducts this meeting this evening on behalf of the Town Council and the residents of Los Gatos, we encourage active participation, which is essential for democracy and critical to the work of this Planning Commission. This participation can occur through, number one, prior to a meeting, written comments about agenda items submitted to staff are always welcome and helpful. The deadlines for submitting written comments are listed on the agenda. And also, second, during our meeting, there are two opportunities for members of the public to participate. First, during the verbal communications period, any individual may speak on a topic that is not on the agenda. And during the meeting, the hearing on specific agenda items, any member of the public may speak on an item that is on the agenda. If you wish to address the commission tonight during verbal communications or during the consideration of an agenda item, you should join the Zoom webinar via the link and password provided on page 2 of the staff report. When I announce the item for which you wish to speak, click the raise hand feature in Zoom. If you're participating by phone only, press *9 on your telephone keypad. When called to speak, please do state your name and address for the record. And in fairness that for all who want to speak at the meeting, we request that you limit your comments to 3 minutes. So we have now come to verbal communications portion of our meeting. Members of the public are invited to address the commission on any issue that is not on the agenda for tonight's meeting. Mr. Paulson, do we have any members of the public wishing to speak on items not on the agenda?
I would offer that the 3 folks I see in the attendees are all related to the project tonight, but if someone would like to speak on an item not on the agenda, please raise your hand. You don't see anyone raising their hand, Chair.
I did not see anyone raising their hands. All right, so then we will move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the consent calendar. And we do have one consent item to be acted upon on a single motion, which is the minutes of the June 10th, 2020 meeting of the Planning Commission. And before anyone acts on the consent calendar, any member of the public or the commission can request that the item be removed from the consent agenda. And at my discretion, the items removed may be considered either before or after the public hearings portion of the agenda. Does anyone wish to pull the item of the approval of minutes, or do we have a motion on the consent calendar? Commissioner Hudes has his hand up.
I move to approve the consent calendar with the items listed.
Is there a second? Commissioner Badami.
Second.
Okay, and so we have a motion and a second. Does anyone have any comments on or adjustments to the minutes before we vote on this? And as a reminder, we'll be conducting via roll call vote. So I will call the commissioners and I ask you to respond yes, no, or abstain. I will start with Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
And then Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
And then Commissioner Birch.
Yes.
And then Commissioner Barnett.
Yes.
Commissioner Hudis,
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff,
Yes.
and then I vote yes as well. So the item passes unanimously. And so then we can move on to the next item on the agenda, which is public hearings. And we have one item on the agenda for public hearings, and that is agenda item 2, which is considering an appeal of a Development Review Committee decision approving a request to demolish a single family residence and construct a new single family residence on property zoned R1-10 located at 146 Robin Way, APN 532-12-015. Architecture and site application S-19-043. And the property owners are, excuse me if I mispronounce your name, Merdad and Leela Decordi. And the applicant is Gary Colset, and the project planner is Diego Mora. May I have a show of hands from commissioners who have visited the site? Okay. Are there any disclosures? I don't see anyone with their hand up, so then we can go on to Mr. Mora. Do you have a staff report for us?
I do. Good evening, commissioners. On May 19, the Development Review Committee held a public hearing for the application where the neighbors raised concerns about the project. The Development Review Committee continued the application to allow the applicant time to address the concerns raised. The applicant met with the neighbors and revised the design. At the June 9th public hearing, based on compliance with the town code and the residential design guidelines, the Development Review Committee approved the application with an added condition of approval for an 8-foot fence and landscape screening addressing privacy concerns that is contained in Condition 11 of Exhibit 3. On June 19th, an appeal of the decision was filed by the adjacent property owner to secure commitment by the applicant to address the privacy concerns in Condition 11. Based on the analysis provided in the staff report, staff recommends denial of the appeal upholding the decision of the Development Review Committee subject to the conditions of approval. I would also like to include a public comment that was inadvertently omitted from Exhibit 10 from Mr. Robert Buxton on May 18th, leading up to the May 19th DRC public hearing. He cited concerns with the architecture, math, and scale of the home. Additionally, he cited concerns of blocked hillside views. This concludes staff's presentation, and we are available for questions. Thank you.
Do any commissioners have questions of staff at this point? Commissioner Birch.
During the DRC meeting, when it was added to the conditions of approval to have the higher fence and the landscape screening, was the applicant along with the neighbors aware of that condition of approval? And was there any indication given that that would meet the privacy concerns that the neighbor had brought up?
The applicant was aware of the condition of approval. The specifics to that approval and how that would be met was left up to the applicant and the owner adjacent to the property. That question.
You care if I follow?
Go ahead, Commissioner Birch.
So the 8-foot fence and the landscaping was an agreement between the homeowner and the neighbor. But there's still then, from what I'm understanding, from what I'm reading, still some concerns about that agreement and the privacy?
That is correct.
And so, Commissioner Birch, let me jump in as well. So that condition was placed on the application at the DRC hearing. The applicant and the adjacent owner, who's currently the appellant, were amenable to it. I think the appellant's concerns were there were no details associated with that because it was something that was added at that meeting. And so I know that applicant, I believe, has met with the neighbor and their landscape architect. And so I think they've had conversations, but ultimately we're moving forward with the appeal because the appeal was not withdrawn.
Okay, thank you.
I had a related question to that. If we read the language of the appeal, and I guess we can ask the appellant, it specifically says they were looking for a written commitment from the applicant on how this is going to work. And is my understanding, and I'm asking for staff's confirmation, that we don't normally ask for the when we put something in the conditions of approval, we don't normally expect the applicant on top of that, write something up because it's in the conditions of approval and they otherwise can't proceed with their development and building permits and so on and so forth. Is that correct?
So if Mr. Mora doesn't have any input on that, again, I think that we put the condition in, but the details behind that hadn't been fleshed out yet because it was something that was addressed at the meeting. But obviously the project couldn't move forward to building permit level without that condition being addressed. And so that would require cooperation between both the applicant and the appellant saying, yes, this satisfies that condition from their perspective, to the satisfaction of the community development director.
Okay, and then one other procedural question, and I'm doing this really for the benefit of the anyone viewing, is since this appeal was based solely on the screening from the south side of the property, is it okay for members of the public to bring up other issues and to create basically a brand new hearing that could bring in any issues on top of what was in the appeal? Or are we only considering the language of the appeal? So as with typical appeals, and if the either town attorney or deputy town attorney have any additional, this is a de novo hearing, so you are free to ask questions about any aspects of the project. Obviously the appeal is very specific, but ultimately, as with all appeals, it becomes an opportunity for you to bring up any questions that you might have. Okay, all right, thank you. Now, do any other commissioners have questions of staff? Commissioner Hudes. You're on mute.
Thank you. My question is about the architect's report, and there were some elements of the architect's report that were very specific, but there were also some things. And so my question of staff is, when the architect says simplify something, is it clear what that means? They drew a box several times on several of the drawings with a box around them so that says simplify.
Thank you, Mr. Hudes. When the architect indicates simplify, is giving some flexibility to the applicant to come up with some sort of solution and justify how that component of the comment was indeed simplified. It may be reduction in height, it may be reduction in mass, etc.
Okay, thank you.
All right, do any other commissioners have questions of staff? Okay, seeing none, we will now open the public portion of the public hearing and give the appellant and then the applicant an opportunity to address the commission for up to 5 minutes. Mr. Paulson, who will be speaking as the appellant?
That I do not know. I don't see the appellant in the attendee list. I do see a hand raised, so I'm going to allow what may be Ms. Buxton to speak. And so let me allow her to talk and then see if they have any other input. I do not see the appellant listed.
Mr. Paulson, Mrs. Hanson. I'm sorry. Here, let me.
We're having some echo.
I'm having technical difficulties, so I apologize. But this is Jim Zaki. I'm using Susan's Buxton's notebook, so I apologize.
Great, that's great.
Okay, I'm so sorry, you guys. So just a couple comments. So the reason I filed the appeal is just to ensure that the screening and the fence are executed. I was invited by the DeCourtys to meet with their landscape architect, as well as Gary Colsott, their architect, to have a discussion about the screening and about the fence. So I invited the DeCourtys, Gary, and their landscape architect, Tina, over to our home so they could get a firsthand view of what we're concerned about. I built a story pole that is 12 feet tall, marked from 8 feet to 12 feet. I walked along the property line in our backyard. Starting from the backyard, I addressed the areas of concern where they were going to remove an apple tree that provided complete screening, and 20 feet in length of 12 feet high rhododendrons that were going to be removed, which would provide a clear line of sight from our backyard to their backyard and their complete rear elevation of their new home, which is almost entirely glass. So severe concerns of privacy on my side. On the windows of the north elevation of our home, their structure is going to be, I believe it's 18 feet tall. We're 3 feet higher from an elevation grade perspective, and our views are completely obstructed. So my desire was to have that screened with plants as well. So in the meeting with, what I will say is that for some reason the DeCourtys declined to come over to our backyard to see it, but I did meet with the landscape architect and Gary, and we agreed in concept of the height of the plants that would need to be installed to provide proper screening. My intent was, and my desire would to have that completed before the construction is started. And again, the complete intent is to have privacy and to screen what will be the new structure. Because of our property being 3 feet higher from an elevation grade perspective, the size of the plants that Gary estimated would have to be 36-inch box plants. And we agreed with that in concept at the meeting that we had. I received a proposal from the DeCourtys with respect to the planning. They proposed 10 each 15-gallon plants to provide coverage relative to the story poles I put up. At our elevation grade, the plants would have to be 10 feet tall. 15-gallon plants are 6 feet tall. When I received that proposal, I hired a plant expert to come over and review the situation. He let me know, and I can provide you his name and all of his everything about him if you would like. But he told me that it would take 10 years for a 15-gallon plant to get to that size. So I was very concerned that we had agreed in concept over what was going to be provided and then what was proposed. Additionally, for the backyard, there's an apple tree that Gary Colsat said would not survive. My plant expert said it would not survive. The new foundation of the new proposed home is encroaching under the canopy of that tree substantially. There are surface roots, and again, I'm not an arborist or anything, but both Gary and the plant expert that I hired said that that tree would not survive. So again, the DeCourtys proposal to keep the apple tree that they were previously going to remove because it wouldn't survive, and 10, 15-gallon podocarpus that are 6 feet tall are just really not in alignment with what we agreed to. That's my concern. And again, I can provide you with all the information I received from my plant expert. My proposal is to have 20 each 36-inch box podocarpus along the fence line to provide screening and the privacy that we're enjoying today. And that's it. And I apologize for being a bit disjointed because of my technical difficulties in having to use somebody else's PC. So sincere apologies.
Okay, well, thank you very much. So we're glad that you were able to come in and make comments. I want to ask my fellow commissioners if they have any questions for the appellant. Vice Chair Janoff has her hand up.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Zaki, for your comments. My question is, your proposal mentions 20 each 36-inch box plants, but you don't mention the fence itself. Do you have any other conditions or requests regarding the 8-foot fence that's in the required by the conditions of approval, condition number 11? Is it
Yes,
just the
ma'am.
box fence? Mhm.
Yes, ma'am. And I apologize. I did have that on my notes, and I'm so disjointed, disheveled that I missed it. But yeah, so that on the proposed plan, the fence is not noted, and we agreed in concept to an 8-foot fence, 6-foot fence, 2-foot lattice. And thank
Okay,
you for
thank you.
asking.
Okay. Now, do any other commissioners have questions for the appellant? Commissioner Hudis and then Commissioner Barnett.
Thank you. I understand that the appeal is being made about the privacy issues, and I understand the review is a de novo review. Nevertheless, neighbors in their letters raised other issues about the architecture and height. As the appellant, do you share any of those concerns?
Yes, Mr. Hudis. So thanks for asking. And I'm not familiar with, or I've never been through this process before, but I definitely was one of the concerned neighbors relative to architecture, relative to the height of the building, the architectural style, the scale and scope of the project. And I had documented all that information previously. My appeal was relative to the screening and the fencing. I don't believe anybody filed an appeal relative to the DRC's ruling for the approval of the building itself. But I definitely have concerns about that.
Thank you.
Okay, and Commissioner Barnett, you had your hand up.
Yes, I noted in Mr. Zaki's email of May 18th, there was a reference to a declaration of restrictions relating to the subdivision. And I was wondering if you felt that there were any provisions of that declaration that may affect the privacy issue.
Mr. Barnett, can you repeat that question? I'm sorry.
Yes, as I read your email of May 18th, you mentioned that there's a declaration of restrictions relating to the subdivision, and I was wondering if that bears on your appeal.
I don't believe it does. I think those were the original documents when the subdivision was first developed in, the mid-50s.
Okay, that satisfies my question.
Okay, and do any other commissioners have questions for the appellant? Okay, it looks like there are none. So then we will move on and we will ask to have the applicant speak for up to 5 minutes on their behalf.
Thank you. I see Gary Colsat is raising his hand, so he is ready to speak for up to 5 minutes.
Okay, Mr. Colsat, go ahead and I had neglected before, but if you could please state your name and address for the record.
Good evening, everybody. This is Gary Colsat. I am at 51 University Avenue, Suite L, Los Gatos, California, 95030. Nice to see everybody tonight. Can everybody hear me okay? Am I too loud, too soft?
It's good.
Okay. Normally when we get conditions of approval with like this, we work with staff and a neighbor or concerned person to make sure that the screening is appropriate. And that was our plan all along. With the appeal, kind of kickstarted it a little bit more. We were attempting to satisfy the Jackies' concerns when we met with them on July 9th. And we had our landscape architect and I joined as well. First of all, we're okay with the 8-foot fence at 6 foot of solid plus 2 feet of lattice. And that will go on the architectural plan, architectural site plan, which will be part of our next set of documents that the planning staff will review. But it doesn't surprise me that the Jackies were concerned about this, just given the nature of their needs, that they didn't want to leave it to chance. And so I'm generally okay with that. I still think that we could have worked this all out to everybody's satisfaction, but here we are. So that being said, the things we talked about at the site on July 9 were the appropriate screening materials and the appropriate sizes and locations. And several things were discussed. The apple tree was kind of a contention point. The Jackies loved the apple tree, and the Cordies also loved the apple tree. They felt that it wasn't going to survive. We have actually re-looked at the grading plan. You can see, if you look at these landscape plan, I don't know if Diego, you could share that plan for me. Is that possible, the plan that we gave you? It's the landscape plan. Is that? Well, anyway, the canopy of the tree does come into our patio, but not necessarily too much into the roof covering, because we have an open section over the outdoor kitchen that has no roofing on it at all. So we're talking about 10% of the canopy, as I'm estimating 10% of the canopy of the tree conflicting with our roof. So we think that it could survive, and maybe it needs a little bit of soil put around it. We are raising the house up by 6 inches from where it is now. So we have the ability to actually add some topsoil and cover some of those roots. So we thought that that was a kind of a good solution overall for that aspect of it. And then we talked about the side screening between the two homes right there in that area. And the difficulty with buying or installing larger podocarpus at 36-inch size boxes, they're quite expensive. They take the 24-inch box would probably, after a few years, catch up to the 36 and be better established. So it's preferred to plant smaller sizes in the long term. But I do understand, I completely understand their desire to provide more immediate screening. So what we talked about doing was raising a planter box, extending the planter box, replacing it and extending it into our side yard at the level of their property, which is 3 feet higher than our property, and to actually get 3 feet of height for our plants. And so we are starting the plants at the elevation of their house, which, you know, that you've got an 8-foot fence. We felt that we needed 10 or 11 feet. I'm sure that Jim Jackie could refresh my memory on that, but we thought 10 or 11 feet would be the goal. What we didn't want to do was plant something that was going to grow to 12 or 15 or 20 feet, because that's going to block too much from both parties. So we wanted to find that intermediate perfect plant. And the podocarpus is an evergreen that grows very well. The problem with planting a larger size box is that the planter box itself needs to be wider to accommodate the root ball and drainage and everything like that. And so we are starting to encroach into our side yard quite a bit with a larger planter in order to handle the larger box.
Excuse me,
I'm not saying that.
That-
Running out of time, Joel?
That's the 5 minutes there.
That was fast.
Okay,
So,
okay.
Can I
Did
close
you have
up?
one last thing you wanted to say?
I do. I just want to point out that not only does their house sit 3 feet above ours, but part of their backyard is it raised up actually at the next door neighbor's property level, which is about 2.5 feet up there. So when they're talking about some of their privacy screening, they're talking about in their backyard, in the very far part of their backyard, which is another 2.5 feet. And they're looking down from about 5.5 feet down on the Cordy's property. So they're looking down. The Cordy's are not necessarily going to be looking up because of the 8-foot fence. So
okay,
I'm happy to take questions.
All right, so let me see if any of the commissioners have questions for you. All right, I'm not seeing anyone that has raised up. Vice Chair Janoff.
Yeah, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Colsett. Did you propose or did you have a discussion regarding the 24 square inch boxes versus 36 with the appellant?
we talked about 3 different sizes. We talked about the 15-gallon, the 24-inch box, and a 36-inch box. If you do the 36-inch box, you're going to space them farther apart. The landscape architect was highly recommending going with the 15-gallon because of a better overall health of the plant in the long term. I normally use either between 15-gallon and 24-inch box. There was some discussion about using something that would get them more immediate screening. And indeed, we did talk about, as long as we could have a reliable water source during construction, to get these things established now. And that was, I think that's a wonderful plan.
Let me just interrupt you for a second. My question was, have you proposed the 24-inch box sizes to the appellant? I understand your discussion about the benefits of the 24 or the 15 versus the 36, but have you discussed the 24-inch option with the appellant?
We did discuss several, and then between the Decordes and the landscape architect, they decided that the 15 was what they wanted to present. And so that's what they chose to put on this plan at this time.
Okay, so just so I'm clear, the appellant is proposing 36 and the owner is proposing 15, and you're suggesting 24 is a better compromise. Is that correct?
I think that's a fair statement. Yes. Yes.
All right. Thank you.
Yes. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Does any other commissioners have questions for the applicant? Okay, so seeing none, we will move on, and this would be the time that we would take public comments. And so I want to find out from Mr. Paulson if anyone has raised their hand to make comments from the public.
Yes, Robert Buxton would like to speak.
Okay. Go ahead, Mr. Buxton. He's still on mute.
Yeah, just need to unmute yourself.
So I hope you started the 3 minutes over, please.
I haven't even started it yet.
Okay, I'll tell you when you can start it, Mr. Paulson. So can you all hear me?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. So thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. My name is Bob Buxton. My wife and I have lived at 118 Robin Way for 38 years, 2 sons, Los Gatos Schools, Cal Poly, UCLA, and we're strongly involved in volunteer work, as some of you know. This is a very tight-knit neighborhood. And when I say neighborhood, I'm speaking of Robin Way, Cardinal, and Stony Brook. It's comprised of wonderful and respectful families. Our current position on the application is as follows. Number 1, support the appellants, Mr. and Mrs. Zaki, and their right to privacy and quality of life. 36-inch is going to handle it. They have hired a landscaper, etc. With the $2 million budget for this home, a few more dollars for the right thing to do for the Zakis is more than appropriate. Item number 2, because of poor communications from the beginning of the process, we recommend that the Planning Commission act on alternative number 1, quote unquote, continue the matter to a date certain with special direction. We look forward to the Planning Commissioners taking a leadership role and getting this matter resolved. We're not that far away. It has been a stressful time for many residents. There is no need for an appeal to the Town Council. Couple additional comments. I had a memo to the DRC of May 18th that I don't know if you got it in your package or not. It wasn't originally there, but I wanted to point out one part of that May 18th, my email, and that is exhibit number 15. We never approved the project in December, and we don't approve it now. We are supporting the Zakis appeal. Exhibit number 15 is incorrect in many ways as to the neighbors' positions. This is when everything started. We wouldn't be here today if it was done correctly. Lastly, something that really bothers me is the portrayal of the existing home to be demolished. And I'm not saying it shouldn't be demolished, but the original owner and seller approximately 5 years ago sold the property to the current homeowners. The home was in pristine condition. Lester H. Strickler and his wife spared no expense on 146 Robin Way. Mr. Strickler, a well-known and respected landowner, developer, and financier in the Valley. His business is Los Gatos Investment Company. The condition stated is an insult to Mr. Strickler and lacks total respect. And it really bothers me that the house is being portrayed as falling down, the walls caving in, et cetera, et cetera. Anyway, that's all I have to say, and I would be happy to answer any questions. Thank you very much.
Do any commissioners have any questions? Commissioner Hudes.
This is the same question that I had for the appellant. There were other issues that were raised in letters from neighbors about the architecture neighborhood compatibility. In your mind, are those still issues that should be considered, or were those issues that were resolved satisfactorily from your opinion?
My opinion is those are still issues. I'm looking out my office window now at the story poles and the obstruction of our hillside views. The size and mass of the building itself, it does not fit the neighborhood. But the issue tonight from our perspective is to totally and completely support the Zackies in what their desire is for privacy and for sure quality of life. But Commissioner Hudes, yes, still an issue. And when I say neighborhood, I've told you the 3 streets, somewhere around 50% of the neighborhood are not in favor of this project, but we're here to support the Zackies.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Commissioner Badami has a question for Mr. Buxton. You're still on mute.
Mr. Buxton, thank you. I just want to clarify your testimony in that although you had concerns with the architecture, the neighborhood compatibility, your issue in order for this to go forward is that you want to support your neighbor and that we have the 36-inch box plants. And that would be satisfactory despite the architecture and neighborhood compatibility, since that seems to be the issue tonight. And that was what you started your conversation with?
Absolutely. Again, supporting the Zackies 36-inch, life's too short. We're going to have obstructed views. The house doesn't fit the neighborhood. Many well-known realtors in the area agree with that statement, but we are supporting the Zackies. The rest of it is what it is. Life's too short. So let's get on with this, and please, I appreciate all your support. Let's just get it done for the Zackies.
Thank you, Mr. Buxton.
Yes, ma'am.
And do any other commissioners have questions for Mr. Buxton? Okay, seeing none, I will ask, I don't think there's anyone else from the public in the attendees, but I just want to confirm with Mr. Paulson.
That's correct.
Okay, so then the next item when we're doing an appeal would be to go back to the applicant first and then the appellant and give them each 3 minutes to respond to questions from the public or give any final comments to the commission before we begin our deliberations. So I will, thank you. So I'll ask the applicant to speak. You have up to 3 minutes to respond or add any additional comments.
Thank you. I do want to say that we haven't given up working with the Zackies. This is by far not our best and final offer. This was just something that was a result of our meeting, and not only with the Zackies, but with the owner and the landscape architect. We respect the process. We respect the town staff that will make sure that everybody is done right by this. I do want to comment about, I didn't have a chance earlier to comment about the architecture. We did change it fairly dramatically in terms of simplifying it. After our first DRC hearing, we went back, we changed it once after we got Mr. Cannon's review. We worked with staff. They felt it was appropriate. We then changed it more to simplify it even more to help try to fit it in with the neighbors' concerns. And we lowered the house and we created more exhibits to really showcase what we've done. And so if you are looking at your package and you're looking at our sheet A3, we did a full color streetscape with the neighbors' homes and our home and landscaping with and without. And you can see how this house we feel as respectful as it's going to get in this neighborhood. I'm proud of this house. I think it's going to be a very eye-catching house. And hopefully there's harmony. My hope in the end is that there's harmony renewed in this neighborhood, especially on Robin Way. Everybody is very considerate and community-minded, and the Cordies are there as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Mr. Colsett. Do any commissioners, it looks like Commissioner Hudis has a question for you.
Thank you. Mr. Colsett, the staff report lists 7 items that were recommendations from the consulting architect to address consistency with the residential design guidelines. In the final plans, the ones that are being considered now, have these 7 items been addressed?
In my mind, we would not have been at the DRC if they hadn't been addressed. Mrs. Arnowitz and Mr. Diego were working with us directly quite a bit. I think that they were quite, when we made the second round of changes, we commented that there's even more what Mr. Cannon was going for, and they said yes, even though they liked the other one. They were fine with the other one. Although they're not the arbitrators of architecture, but they're the professionals, and we rely on them, and you guys rely on them to get us to this point. So in my mind, I think we have. That's a subjective question, I think, though. If you don't, do you agree with that or not?
So Commissioner Hudis, you have a follow-up question?
Yeah, so I'm just picking one of them out. Number 4. Select a roof material more similar to the other homes in the immediate neighborhood. Was that addressed?
That's the one item that seems to come up quite a bit, but the design guidelines are probably ready for a little update. As you see that there are quite a few of these standing seam metal roofs in Los Gatos. I think we had another challenge of that roof on another project, and a client of ours went around and found 25 examples without even breaking a sweat. So we changed the color of the roof from the gray to the brown, and these are not reflective roofs. These are and these are very high quality roofs. They're probably the most expensive roof you can get besides a slate roof. And I would say that this is as a spirit of ranch houses. You see them all over the country, this type of roof being used in modern farmhouse projects. So
Commissioner Hudis still has a more question.
Just as a follow-up, the homes that you mentioned with the standing seam roof, are they in the immediate neighborhood or the adjacent neighborhood?
They're in the adjacent neighborhoods, but not on the immediate 252.
Okay, thank you.
Do any other commissioners have questions for the or comments for the applicant? It doesn't seem like we do, so then we will go on and ask the appellant if they would wish to comment for 3 minutes.
Thank you, Ms. Hanson. I greatly appreciate it. I'm just going to read through a few observations, concerns, and proposed solutions. Hopefully I'll be a little more concise now that I've had a chance to take a breath. And again, I apologize for being just a little bit disjointed initially. So with respect to the plants and the screening and the privacy, without question, the new structure is going to be, and it's surprising because we're 3 feet higher, is blocking our views out that side of our house. So just with respect to the issue at hand with respect to the screening. So the observations are as follows. The proposal was for 10 each 15-gallon podocarpus. They're no more than 6 feet tall. The existing apple tree has a surface root system. For the plans, the new proposed foundation is going to encroach well into the canopy and over the exposed root structure. The 20 lineal feet of the 12-foot tall rhododendrons to be removed was not addressed in the revised plan and leaves substantial exposure. The required no less than 8-foot fence was not reflected in the revised plans. My concerns, properly cared for, and Bob mentioned this as well. Thank you, Robert. But properly cared for 15-gallon podocarpus take 10 years to reach the height and girth for the required screening. That's per the expert consultant that I hired. 36-inch boxes are what would be required to achieve that. Gary did repeatedly comment that due to the age and the surface root structure, the apple tree would not survive. Our consultant also commented that and was in alignment with that thought process as well. The DeCourty's proposal is in not any fashion in alignment with our in-person discussion and conceptual agreement. So I'm very glad that I went through the town process, and I've never been through this before, but I'm greatly appreciative of this process and being able to ensure that everything is documented and well vetted. So thanks very much for that. So the proposed solution again, include in the revised plans no less than an 8-foot fence with 6 foot of solid and 2 foot of lattice, which we agreed to. Provide 20 each, 2 per each 8-foot section, 36-inch box podocarpus along the fence line. As previously planned, remove the apple tree. Erect the fence and install the plants prior to the initiation of construction. And then finally, I just want to ensure and guarantee the proper watering and care of the noted plants, and that we put some sort of requirement to replace any failed plants within a certain period of time. And again, I just want to thank the town very much for their consideration and for having this process for us to go through, and look forward to moving it forward. So thank you very, very much for the opportunity to speak.
Okay, thank you very much. And do any commissioners have questions for the appellant? It looks like Commissioner Tavana, or did I? No. Okay. All right. Do any other commissioners have questions for the appellant? Okay, so seeing none, we will close the public portion of the hearing and ask if any commissioners have questions of staff, wish to comment on the application, or introduce a motion for consideration by the commission. Commissioner Barnett.
Well, if I heard Mr. Kolstad directly, he's saying that their position that's been communicated so far is not their best offer. It seems to me it would be appropriate to allow some time for further conversation.
So I think what you're suggesting is a continuance?
That is what I have in mind, yes.
Okay. I'd like to hear from other commissioners on their thoughts on the application. Commissioner Birch, and then Commissioner Janoff and Commissioner Badami.
I'm going to ask a question maybe of my fellow commissioners. I am usually one of the first ones to say that if all they're appealing is one thing, we should only look at the one thing. However, in this particular appeal and in going back through what the town architect had recommended and through some of the neighbors' letters, aside from the issue about the privacy, which to me feels like there's probably an easier solution there that we can be met. I am actually struggling with some of the elements of the house architecturally as far as how it fits in with the neighborhood. Now, again, I can drop that there if we all feel that DRC approved that particular aspect and we don't want to discuss that any further. But I would like to know if there's anyone else that feels a concern about that, if we do want to even entertain a conversation about that.
Okay. All right. So let's see. We also had Commissioner or Vice Chair Janoff and then Commissioner Badami had their hands up.
Yeah, thank you. I think it's respectful to limit the scope of our discussion tonight to what the appellant is asking for. And with regard to that, since we don't have an alternative proposal from the applicant, then I find that what the appellant is requesting to be reasonable. There seems to be relatively little conversation that leads to a mutual understanding and commitment. And so having these 4 items enumerated, the quantity 20, 36-inch box, the 6-foot fence with a 2-foot lattice, the removal of the apple tree and installation of the screening prior to the beginning of construction seem reasonable to me. I did want to comment about the apple tree. While it might be noble to try to save it, if there's any concern that it might not be salvageable, it's probably wise to remove it before you wind up in a situation where the item you're counting on for screening actually doesn't wind up screening, and then you're left in a future state where you don't have the privacy that you're looking for tonight. So I would be in favor of the appellant's proposal as stated. With regard to the architecture, I too would like to make some comments about it. I didn't have a problem with the standing seam roof. I think those are interesting, and I think they're going to be a part of construction, and particularly this time period. We've even seen the standing seam roof on Victorian homes, so it's not completely inappropriate. The one item I found odd was the front wood square box that's still there. The one box that the architect commented on was tucked under the eave as you're looking at the elevation at the eave on the left side of the house. And that front detail looks a little bit odd to me, but I don't have a huge problem with it. If my other commissioners don't, I'd be willing to limit tonight to a decision about the privacy that the appellant is asking for.
Okay, thank you, Vice Chair Janoff. Commissioner Badami.
I too, I typically would like to have a conversation about the architecture, the bulk and the mass and the privacy issues, but it looks like we're not there right now. We're kind of limiting the scope to what the appellant is looking for. And I don't see or feel that the proposal of the appellant is unreasonable as well. So if that can't be resolved tonight or agreed upon tonight, then I'm also going to be looking for a continuance.
Okay, thank you, Commissioner Badami. Do any other commissioners want to comment at this point? I would just like to add my comments. I too noted that there was extensive comments during the DRC review process about the bulk and mass of the application, and some comments about maybe some of the square footage might have been relocated underneath the house in a cellar and so on and so forth. But I also agree that it was very consistent from the comments from the public tonight, as well as the comments from the appellant, that even though those issues might have been on the table, they are willing to limit their concerns to what was in the appeal, and that's about the screening between the two homes. And I also thought that the appellant was very specific, went to the trouble of hiring their own expert, and has made a very specific proposal that I agree with Vice Chair Janoff doesn't seem unreasonable. I would prefer, if we can get resolution on this tonight, that if the if the applicant is able to agree to those conditions, that we could avoid having to have another hearing on this subject, but I don't know the best way to do that. So I'm going to ask, oh, and we have a comment from Commissioner Hudes as well.
Thank you. And I'm responding to Commissioner Birch's comment earlier. With regard to the privacy issue, I'm definitely persuaded that the appellant has proposed a reasonable solution to this. Maybe it needs to be tweaked, but I, basically think that issue is resolved. I personally am still struggling with being able to make the findings about neighborhood compatibility, but I'm still thinking about it.
All right. Does anyone else wish to comment on the application? So then I think this would be a good time if any of the commissioners were willing to make a motion, and let's see where we can go with it. So we have the option of approving it with additional condition, or denying the appeal and approving with additional condition as proposed by the appellant. There was one suggestion of continuance. So I'd like to see, where we're at on that, if anyone's willing to make a motion. All right, I'm not seeing anyone willing to make a motion. Vice Chair Janoff.
Yeah, my apologies. I would like to make a motion, but I don't have the documents in front of me. I'm limited to a few pieces of paper, so I don't have the formal motion language before me. And so I hesitate to make the motion in case there are formalities that need to be included, but we would be willing to do so otherwise.
Okay. Before we do that, I did want to ask staff a question. If it was the desire of the commission to make a motion and the will and there was a vote in favor of it, wouldn't we need to ask the applicant if they're willing to agree to that condition, or would we just make the motion and say this is the condition, and then they'd have to decide whether to live with it?
You would make the motion with the condition, and they would have the opportunity to appeal it to council if they weren't comfortable with that condition. I see.
Okay. All right. So Vice Chair Janoff, I think we could probably make it work with the referring to the findings that are listed in the staff report. It was around the residential design guidelines and so on and so forth. So if you wanted to make a motion, I think we could do it and just refer to the findings that are mentioned in the staff report. And okay, if you're not okay with that, please say something. But I think you delineated where all the findings were in the staff report.
That's been done in the past, so you can just reference the findings and considerations as illustrated in the staff report.
Okay, so take it away, Vice Chair Janoff.
Okay, thank you. So I move to in reference to the appellant's subject property and in reference to the findings and conclusions in the staff report, move to amend the staff recommendations to include the 4 points of proposal that the appellant has provided, which we've already enumerated and as part of the record as part of the conditions of approval.
Okay, so your motion is to deny the appeal with the condition of amending the conditions of approval.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, all right. I just want to make sure we had it right. Okay, so then do we have a second? Commissioner Badami has her hand up.
I move it. So seconded.
All right, so Commissioner Badami seconds the motion. Do any commissioners want to make any additional comments before we take a vote? Okay, seeing none, then we will do a roll call vote, and please answer yes, no, or abstain. So Commissioner Badami.
Yes.
Okay, Commissioner Tabana.
Yes.
Commissioner Birch.
I'm actually going to say no, knowing that I believe this is going to pass, but only because I'm really struggling with the architecture, particularly the roof. So I'll have to say no.
Okay, that's fine. And then Commissioner Hudis?
No.
Okay, Commissioner Barnett?
Yes.
Vice Chair Janoff?
Yes.
And then I vote yes as well. So it passes 5-2. And are there any appeal rights on this decision?
There are. Thank you, Chair. So anyone who's not satisfied with the decision of the Planning Commission can appeal that decision to the Town Council. The appeal forms can be found online and they must be submitted. There is a fee for filing the appeal and the appeal must be filed within 10 days.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so that concludes item 2 on the agenda. So we move on to the next item on the agenda, which is other business. And that starts with the report from the Director of Community Development. Do you have a report for us, Director Paulson?
Thank you, Chair. So briefly, General Plan Advisory Committee met on I think it was the 16th, and began discussions on the mobility element for the general plan. They didn't get through that discussion, so they'll have to have a further discussion in August to continue that conversation. Tomorrow night, we actually have a scoping meeting for the environmental impact report for the general plan update. Tomorrow evening via teleconference. This is an opportunity for the public to let us know if there's things that they think should be addressed in the environmental impact report that we're not already planning to address. And then the General Plan Advisory Committee will also have a special meeting next Thursday to have a conversation about pandemic response, emergency, health issues, as well as racial, social justice, and equity. So we'll be having that conversation via teleconference next Thursday at 7 p.m. And with that, I think that would conclude my report for this evening.
Thank you, Director Paulson. And so then the next item is subcommittee reports. In addition to their service on the Planning Commission, members of the commission serve on several town committees. Are there any reports tonight? And just for a reminder for the public, the 3 committees are the Conceptual Development Advisory Committee, the General Plan Advisory Committee mentioned by Director Paulson, and the Historic Preservation Committee. So are there any reports? I believe the Historic Preservation Committee has met since June 10th, including today, right? So is there anyone that will speak on that? Okay, Commissioner Hudis.
So the Historic Preservation Committee considered 7 items tonight, and they were, they don't even all fit on my screen, sorry. I'm sorry, yes. The first one was 445 Los Gatos Boulevard. The next one was 224 Wilder Avenue, 253 West Main, 78 West Main, 17361 East Vineland, and the general plan where we gave some input based on the Historic Preservation Committee looking at the general plan. And that item was scheduled for the August meeting to continue to work on that.
Okay, thank you very much. I wanted to add on a little bit to what Director Paulson said. Actually, since the last time this Planning Commission met on June 10th, we've actually had 3 meetings of the General Plan Advisory Committee. So we've been very, very busy. On June 18th, we met about public facilities, services, and infrastructure. And it was in the process of that meeting that I think we realized that we didn't have any specific mention of the pandemic response and that we're living through right now, and that we could easily have another one in the next 20 years, as well as the issues around social justice and racial equity. So that's where that additional special meeting came from, because I think that staff's recommendation was that, and the consultants as well, is that it could impact many elements, not just that element. And the process that we're going through right now in the General Plan Advisory Committee is we are actually going through all the different elements. And then we're giving comments and then they come back to us. So we also, on July 2nd, went over the environment and sustainability element. That was a very long meeting, and we still have some concerns about there was probably 5 pages of implementation programs and stuff that maybe needed to be updated. So that's still pending. And then on the mobility element that we went over on the 16th, we only had time to go over the high level goals. And so there's really quite a bit left to go through on the mobility element before we can go to the next level. So there is a lot going on with the General Plan Advisory Committee. And I think we're finding that even though the general plan has been serving us well, our town well, that there's definitely things that are dated and need to be updated in the plan. And so we're going to keep working our way through that, and hopefully we'll get this thing finished in the next 6 to 8 months. And that was all the comments I had. I wanted to ask, as far as commission matters are concerned, are there any matters that any commissioner wishes to discuss at this point? I don't see any comments from commissioners, so then I will say thank you all for participating in this meeting. And on behalf of the commission, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.
Good night.